A lot of feminine also, I'm realizing that the feminine are the mediums of the world, like they're the receiver of, like we all have this feminine counterpart, even men, but women
the anima
are these channels that were repressed. So we were basically stuck in the 3D and the rational with no disconnection to like other realms for so long.
It's wonderful that it's becoming more accepted, like women's voices, women's experiences, but also there's the duality, it pushes back, there's a pushback from the patriarchal systems that don't really wish this.
They don't want to
like
lose
women's
control.
rights in America being up, for women's rights becoming under question and things like that, in places around the world. Someone fly, hurry!
Oh my God. Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Blue Hour podcast. And then this week, just in time for the new moon and Halloween, I received the Kara Eckler and we decided to film outside, as you're gonna see. It was a quite interesting experience being submitted to all the elements as we were filming. So you'll see there's a few spontaneous things that happen, which I think just make the episode more interesting if you ask me. So Kara has a background in sex work, Tantra, Mysticism. She did her Bachelor in Fine Arts at a university in upstate New York, where she's from. And she currently works and also does a monthly review at the Belgo building in Montreal. And has had a few shows in Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal, to name a few. So let's jump right in. Welcome, Kara. Thanks. Kara. Thanks for accepting to join me in this beautiful farmland.
Thank you.
In the Outaouais.
It's a beautiful drive to get here from the Laurentians.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful day. We're filming this, it's beginning of October.
Perfect autumn day.
So maybe start by introducing yourself, maybe like whatever you feel like saying about your practice.
Well, I'm a painter. I paint with figuration involving a lot of mythology, self-portraiture, portraits of people in my life, and using archetypes and symbolism as part of my practice. And also I do some writing, some creative writing, but also art reviews, and I organize an artist community with my friend called the Artist Confluence, where we bring creatives together for networking, parties, events, like career development, studio visits, exhibitions and things like that, like the Petit et Intime show that you were in the Belgo last year. We're doing little grassroots independent things with independent artists, which are underrepresented and maybe not getting as much exposure as they deserve. So
and what's are you working on a series right now?
Yes, I'm working on a new series, kind of processing my experiences during the pandemic and isolation, and what came up for me during the isolation of the pandemic, both good and bad and everything in between. It touches on the story of Lilith, who was considered to be the first wife of Adam in Jewish mythology. And she was alternately considered a demon, a goddess, all of these things. And she left heaven and went to the desert. She was sort of banished to the desert. And in her isolation there, she was visited by different creatures, satyrs, nymphs, owls, hyenas, and those were her friends. And for me, the experience of being isolated in the Laurentians, it was very interesting because I had just become single after a long marriage. I was processing a lot of that, of death and grief, and I'm an introvert. I can be alone for long periods of time, but processing what comes up during that time, and people who visited me, and the way that overlapped with the myth. The way I work with painting is to use archetypes and mythology and use it to mythologize my own life as a way of understanding the deeper meanings and processing my experiences. And
from this, because you're doing it right now, so it's fresh, but
yes.
Are you unpacking something specific like that that's what I do too with my art. It becomes a mirror and then I can analyze my own art to understand myself better.
I was reading that,
So-
listening to that in the podcast recently. You were talking about reading the symbolism
Yeah.
in a series of paintings.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I do that too. I find it's an interesting way of almost psychoanalysis.
Yeah, definitely.
And the way that you can channel things from the divine,
Mm-hmm.
and also channel ways to understand your life through the art, sometimes as it's unfolding.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Even if I have a preconceived idea of what I want to represent, I sort of let new things come in, let new things emerge in the painting process.
But is there something that has come up that you didn't know before starting the series?
Yes, there was during the pandemic. I was, you weren't supposed to see your friends much, so I didn't see my friends, and I started to have a deeper relationship with plants and also with spirits. I started doing inner journeys where I engaged with healing processes through an almost shamanic experience of working with different deities to seek healing, such as Isis, Lilith, Kuan Yin, Shiva, and I'd started to develop a much deeper meditation practice than I had been doing. And I just went within and I spoke to the spirits and I had visions. And they started to speak to me. I started to have every surface in my house was covered with altars.
Okay.
Like I started to order statues or to build different altars in the different areas of my house. So now it's sort of like a mini temple.
Oh, okay. And what came through? I'm curious because I feel like collectively, especially like post-eclipse, I don't know, there's so many people I've been talking to that have had these very intense initiations almost through different means. Like it could be through artistic means, but also through meditative like states, but that all kind of give insights into the future. Like it feels like whatever you're experiencing now, it seems like it's personal, but it feels like it's also reflected in the collective.
Right.
So I'm curious, what has been your experience like?
Well, the last eclipse has just finished, the one that we had in Libra. That was a new moon eclipse, so it's supposed to represent new beginnings. And it was also paradoxically a south node eclipse. It was on the south node, so it's almost like some old cycles are finishing up, some old karmic cycles, maybe some old relationships or old people might cycle out of your life. And for me, it became a little bit, it's differentiating Aries. You're an Aries, I'm a Libra in Western astrology. So it's the self and the other, and the relationship between relationships and independence and selfhood. And we need both, right? As humans, we need to have our own personal identity and our own individual truth, but we can't become isolated egoists and independent of compassion and thought for others.
Yeah. And that's what came through for you in your life, and you felt reflected back in the...
Yes, it also depends on which house it's in your chart too.
Yeah.
The themes can come through in the house and also in the signs and depending on what part of your chart, if you have any planets or points that it's touching on. It did come up in terms of boundaries and relationships, like what kind of behavior I might put up with, what kind of encroaching. It was in my second house, so encroaching on my space or my personal space. What kind of it can result in aggressive incidents, people acting out, things like that, and sometimes we have to set boundaries over certain behaviors. And
so that was kind of your micro initiation in this time.
Staying calm in the storm too. A lot of storms have been in the news lately.
Yeah.
Like just staying within and doing your spiritual practice when there's chaos.
Even solar storms, like here there was so many like Aureal
I have yet to
Borealis.
see it. That's on my bucket list. I'm hoping
Yeah,
maybe
I'm sure you would have
tonight.
gone outside and seen it. Like
It was cloudy where I was.
okay.
So.
But even the clouds, like they were kind of imprinted on it somehow with a camera when you do an exposure.
Tonight.
But yeah, I did sense that. Like I've always been fascinated with the sun, and I've looked at lots of research that study consciousness, the link between consciousness and solar flares, and how in different the rise and fall of civilizations is very correlated with solar activity. And these solar flares that emit very potent energy that flares into atmospheres, which we
Makes
see
sense.
in the green hues. But I do sense like there is a, you know, lots of mythology. The sun is like the warrior. It's the king. It's the bringer of the new codes,
Right.
in some ways. And
It's
the
the
moon,
active principle.
yeah. And so it
versus
feels like
passive.
there is a lot that is being, you know, expressed to us,
Maybe activations.
activated.
Yeah, the sun, it's interesting because it's both the giver of life, and also it can give things like cancer, and it can burn you, and it can
Yeah.
scorch the earth. So it has this power to be both benefic and malefic in some people's beliefs.
That's true. Yeah, it is.
You
In
know.
Vedic astrology, it's considered a malefic, but it can be, you know, every placement. It depends on your relationship with it. Are you like avoiding dealing with this aspect of yourself, or are you taking responsibility for that part of yourself?
Depending on the aspects to the planets, and you know, if it's dignified, or like my sun in Libra, it's fallen in Libra because the sun is supposed to be our ego, our identity, and if it's in Libra, it's like your identity is too much about others.
Yeah.
So it's considered a weaker expression.
Yeah. You want. This is something that's been on my mind so much, like in the past 2 months, is the sun. But the sun in Vedic astrology, and in my understanding, in my personal experience, most of all, is like very connected with your soul.
Yeah.
And there has been a switch like recently that I can describe, like, you know how it's connected with Leo?
Yeah.
And it's this kind of very firm confidence, but that is not about your personality. It's like almost like a sun, like it's something that's so strong it radiates out of you, and you have to just get out of the way. Like your personality you just have
Like
to move
consciousness itself
Yeah.
that exists and
and
radiates.
it feels like a state of beingness, like just of, you don't need to say anything, you don't have to do anything. All you have to do is be. And being is a synonym to like being present. And when you're present, you know, you can be your best self because you're accessing all the data that is sending to you through nature, sun, what you're hearing, what you're smelling, and this kind of just reflects in your soul, takes automatic action with all this information that you get in the present for the greater good.
Yeah.
And the difference between that and the personality is more in the mind, thinking about things. Should I do this, and then focusing on one thing at a time.
Yeah.
Instead of just being like in the heart, more
You
present.
can kind of feel when you're in one or the other, and we need both, but the mind is more like a machine that you can use and then not let it run the show.
Yeah, it's like a processor.
I see I had this image when you were talking about the sun as the sort of the identity or the energy that radiates and just is. Sometimes people would ask me what it means to follow one's heart. Like I've talked to people who don't really understand when I say what that means. Just follow your heart. Even though it sounds like a cliche, to me it's such a truth. And to me that was never, ever since I had my first spiritual awakening, it was never a question to follow your heart or not. It's like a river. Here we are into this beautiful river. To me, following your heart, it's like the heart is a river that is pulling you through life. You know, like guiding you.
Yeah.
Where if you just flow with it and surrender, it's like the surrender is almost like an energy that goes forth. I think that's consciousness.
Yeah, I agree. It would be like the sun rays. It's emitting from you and lighting the way, you know. As you're going forth, you see the path open up in front of you.
And it might not always take you where you think in your mind that you want to go. Like I wouldn't have chosen with my ego mind, the conscious choices that have led me to where I am, but I also realize I'm meant to be here.
Yeah.
You know, some might say I've had a difficult life, and the things that have brought me to Canada and the experiences might have not always made the best decisions as a young person, but then I wouldn't be here. In astrocartography, have you heard of it?
No.
It's a form of astrology. I haven't studied it deeply, but I've calculated it a few times, and there are lines that are going. It's longitudinally from the Earth, and they are associated with different planets or angles, depending on when you were born. So you can tell if you're in a different city or place, if it's like Toronto is my Uranus line, and New York City and Montreal are on my Venus line, and the Venus represents art and love and these sort of things.
Okay, so you can see how the planets are actually affecting physical locations and your connection
Some
to
people
space.
actually move or try to have their birthday or their solar return in a certain city based on some hardcore, astrologers.
But yeah, that's interesting because it brings astrology more into the physical space. I mean, astrology for me, it's infinite, and I do feel that like it's due for an update.
Yeah.
Like an update in the sense like the systems work. There's Western, there's Vedic. They both have their strength and their weakness, but it feels like even with human design, it does integrate astrology in it and stuff. I feel like these more holistic systems are coming together, and I have a feeling some people will be channeling like new systems soon.
I think it's necessary. It's kind of like how we could use with some of the holy books like the Bible, we could kind of use an update with certain things, and the same with astrology. If you look into Vedic or Hellenistic astrology, some of the interpretations are almost funny with how dire they are. If you have, I have Venus and Mars and Scorpio, so in Hellenistic astrology, it's like basically you're a sick individual, you will have, you will be corrupt and debauched and, diseased and all of these things, and you'll probably become like a psycho killer or something. It's very extreme.
Yeah, they have very rough,
in Vedic too, it can be
Vedic,
pretty dark.
Yeah.
They don't pull any punches. Whereas modern astrology says everything is positive. It's almost like New Agey.
Okay.
Everything is a positive. You just have to see it from a positive angle.
I do. The teacher I learned from. Jaydev, he has a more yogic approach to it. So in this sense, he sees every planet is more like the karmas you have to play out. So do you have to impose your judgment if it's good or not? No. Just learn from them. They're teaching you. They're seeing what karmas have to be played out in this lifetime.
Yeah, it's about where you're at in this incarnation.
Yeah.
Do you believe in reincarnation?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
I mean, from what I've seen, it makes more and more sense that it would. In so many different systems and esoteric traditions, it does feel. It's hard to. You have to let go of your ego to understand, to just intuitively understand it. But I have so many questions that are. Maybe we can come back to this, but let's go to your work. I want to talk about your work because you have a realistic approach to your paintings. It's pretty. You have a lot of bodies, a lot of sexuality as well.
Yep.
And maybe talk about the inspiration, from where it comes from, how it has led you.
It's a bit odd because I'm a big introvert. I spend a lot of time alone, and yet the only thing I want to paint is people.
Okay.
I did a landscape series, and because I love time and nature, but it didn't resonate with me as much. It was enjoyable, but I was like, this is not, maybe I would like the people with the art. I think it's because for me, it's a reflection on incarnation, and a lot of our lessons, our experiences, they're interpersonal, and they reflect. Maybe it's just this incarnation that I'm having, it's lessons and karmic lessons, especially that we learn from others. And so painting for me, I guess I'm a bit of a romantic too. It's honoring people that I love or that I'm connected to in a way. It's sometimes it's peak experiences with a lover or understanding a relationship dynamic, using the people in my life to play out different archetypes too.
Okay.
Different ideas that I want to explore, or sometimes a certain person will remind me of a certain archetype, or I'll want to process an experience, and they're it's sort of like characters in a novel, but it's the novel that is my life, it's seeing life from a detached point of view in a way, and also like a very intimate point of view.
Interesting.
So, and also the people in my life and myself, they're most likely to want to pose, in off sometimes vulnerable positions. I don't know. For me, it's just the most interesting material. It's like, why do you want to paint a sunset
Yeah.
or a river? You know?
Yeah, because I feel like humans, there's the body, but then there's so much more.
Yeah.
And then I think the challenge that you might not have in a landscape, well, also in a landscape, but is painting the emotions, painting the spiritual nature of the person. And like at the same time, like the body is a symbol itself.
Yeah.
So the way it's positioned in context with how the light hits and everything, there's so much nuance a painter can bring that is that is
And
subtle, you know.
I'm influenced a lot by Renaissance art too, in the way that they used the bodies and depicted the gods. And being a mystic, to me, we are all divine, and through painting people, we can represent like different aspects, different archetypes of the divine. And it's a way of, for me, of capturing a moment, not quite like a photograph, but of painting. You know how long it takes to complete a painting, especially like large ones like I do. It can take 100 hours to do. So it's a meditation in itself. The process of it maybe is working out issues and working out things. I had the experience of having a spiritual awakening in 2016 in my art studio in the Belgo.
Really?
And well, there was many layers of it, but often it would flare up while I was in the studio. And I had a deadline coming up, so I would have to like paint through this, and sometimes would be having experiences during painting. It's interesting how just painting and spirituality together, how they, channeling messages from the divine, how do you get an idea for a painting? For me, the figure it's a metaphor for the spirit and the body too, while because the body, it's physical, but we're not just the body, we are also the spirit that activates the body.
Yeah.
So it's a magical thing at all that we're moving this bag of flesh and bones, and we're here for such a short time in the span of the universe that a painting can last for hundreds of years. If I die and they go into the garbage, like that's, so be it. But for me to spend that time channeling something and even working out energies, I kind of have a feeling that paintings are doing something else on another dimension. I was having a little bit of trouble getting exposure around that time that I had my awakening, and I was working with my spirit guides. I had started working with this one guide who showed up, the first one, and he looked like the Grim Reaper, which sounds kind of funny.
Like Saturnian.
Yeah, like I have a bit of goth tendencies when I was growing up, especially. But so maybe in Western culture, the Grim Reaper is like the symbol of death.
Yeah.
But he seemed loving, which was converse. It was an interesting.
But you know what? That
duality.
reminds me, because Grim Reaper would be Saturnian in the way like of death, endings. But Saturnian is connected in Kabbalah with the divine feminine, which is kind of the motherly nurturer, but that nurtures also through like hardship and discipline.
Yeah.
So there is this kind of also unconditional love, but also through the hardships.
And I asked him why, if this is what I'm supposed to be doing spiritually, I don't feel like I'm going against the grain of what I'm being guided to do. Why am I having, so little success or recognition? And basically the answer was, it's doing something else. Like it wasn't, my guides don't always like to give all the answers. Sometimes they tell me it's a need to know basis. Like you just get the information bit by bit that you need to have right now for the unfolding. But it was implying that the paintings were almost like a magic process in themselves. That they had a different activity. And
like for like, you mean it was kind of a revelation about painting in general, or for your painting?
For me, but I think it would apply to others as well.
So like it just gave you more a conscious awareness of how you're treating the act of painting.
Yeah, like don't think of it necessarily as a product to be sold. Like it can be, and it's great if people see it and appreciate it. I've been opening up my studio in the Belgo and just having people come in and experience it, even if they don't want to put a large mythical nude of certain specific people in their paint in their house. They have a strong reaction and they're having an experience by coming and seeing it.
Yeah, definitely. Like this is also the basis of this whole podcast, because for me visions and creation is related. And creation is not necessarily like just painting, but like creating action, putting action into the world that have ripples of effect and have influence. And painting just becomes kind of the condensed version of that, where everything is symbolic, and therefore it has also, it absorbs a lot of energy that can be felt by the viewers
through the artist itself, like touching it and putting their energy into it. You mean?
Yeah,
I kind of have wondered if the paintings hold that energy, almost like a talisman. You know?
I believe that.
I think
Definitely.
so too. You can kind of feel it.
Because I come from the realm of photography, and that was the big switch, because photography it feels more like a scientific tool. Like you do something, it prints on it.
It's a machine.
And it's a machine. It's more like, you know, rational. It's more rigid in a way. I see it as a technology.
Painting. It's in this world that's so digital and so internet based and so much based on screens more and more. I love that painting is so tactile. I love that it's so old. You know, I love that it has a smell, a feel. You know, it's very sensual.
And talking about that, I just bought some paint thinner, but it's made it's a lavender essence. So
is it still toxic?
It's not toxic.
Oh, interesting.
And it just is like lavender. It smells like lavender. Wow. It's made out of lavender.
Does it work?
Yeah, it does work. It's just very expensive.
Yeah.
But the experience of painting with lavender instead of like this toxic thing
amazing.
Just kind of brings another world to like the act of painting. And that for the same reason I wanted to use also natural pigments, which a lot of them are toxic.
And oil paint is very different in energy than acrylic, which is plastic, you know?
Yeah, definitely. But the natural pigments have this more dense resonance. It feels like, I feel it anyways, but it's subtle. But painting with lapis lazuli in my last painting, I mean, there is also a psychological effect of like using I use the rare pigments like lapis lazuli just to paint the deity Nut, the Egyptian deity, and it kind of activates it because you're putting so much sacredness and attention
and it's
to it.
Sacred to the Egyptians, right? Lapis lazuli.
Also.
So it's a way of honoring and respecting the deity. Sort of like if you make an offering on your altar, you know, to Venus, I have a Venus altar now, and I could put apples or roses there. You know, it's a way of honoring that you know something intimate about that god, you know?
True.
And so you're offering something that might please them. If you're making an offering to Lilith, it might be blood or meat, wine.
Yeah, and the Egyptians would have not access to many types of blues. Like lapis lazuli would be the main blue they would have been using. So like on the temples of Egypt, if you go visit and there's blue, it's probably lapis lazuli as well. So I don't know, I've put more attention on the material itself and the way it can activate something within by the choice of different materials.
That's a more interesting way to work with matter than to think about necessarily where you're going to show your work or who's going to buy it or career success. It's kind of a trap too. Like we do have to worry about survival and we should try to get our work seen as artists. I mean, it's perfectly valid to create work in isolation, but also maybe it could do something for the people, provide some kind of activation or insight or raise questions or a new way of thinking.
But it's funny that this comes up. Like for me, it feels like even in the past few weeks, I have had to reinterpret why I'm creating work many times, but this one feels like the most meaningful one. Like it feels like the work has to serve like a bigger purpose. So maybe it's showing it, but sometimes it's like installation that activates. That's what it came to me for my next work. Is it needs to be something that the people actually have to go inside something, and something happens, that like a ritualistic initiation.
I've thought about that too, like creating a space where it's not just paintings on a white wall. It's also like creating an environment that can be disorienting, like your show in the Belgo at Skoll. I forget the title of the show.
Real Fiction.
When I saw it, and I knew that you had a show there, but I didn't look into it at all beforehand. So I was totally, going in blind. And I was very familiar with that gallery. So to walk in and see that everything from being pure white was all totally black. And the lighting was really beautifully done in the gallery. So much so that, you know, I'm a sensitive person. I was very disoriented when I first walked in. Almost felt like you're floating when you walk into a space that is black ceiling, black floor, black walls with these works all lit so that they almost seemed floating. It's almost like I didn't have a way to tell what was close, what was far. It was very destabilizing in a very pleasant way.
Yeah, no, I do love, and the work that was curated there is all people that work with the theme of like contrast and dark and light, and it's like
night was the theme.
Night in this case was the theme, and yeah, the next work is funny. It's I want to do something in the dark, but like almost like an igloo that like, but it's connected to a temple in Egypt where they would have this kind of underground part, really deep underground, under a geyser or something that's called like a hot water source, and they did a temple there of water with an island and water going around it, and they would have had a big mound on top of earth. So this was representing like Isis and Nut, all the feminine deities, and on top is dedicated to Osiris, and they would put like trees that are connected with Osiris. And I want to like kind of recreate this kind of space that people have to go inside, and there's these activations that are symbolic, but there is also something to, you know, awareness has to be brought to, because art has been seen more as an ego thing, you know, you buy art for status, like for decoration, for this, for that, but it has to be, there's a lot of things that have to switch in people's mind, and how we create as artists and how people receive it. Do you go to our gallery just to see art, to, you know, I feel like the spiritual dimension has to be more present.
Like you have to create the mood or set the scene.
Yeah, but also people have to be in that right mindset too, even if the scene is lit. If you're looking at it more like going to the movie theater or going like an activity you do, you won't get this sacredness that you can get.
So have you been thinking about the venue, like if it should be in a gallery or if it should be like in a temple or church or something?
That's something that has come to me in a vision. I think it has to go in a gallery, a space that is accessible, but then not to be sold, to be then transported on land in nature, and to be for its life to continue, and then for more ritualistic purposes.
Right. Sounds interesting.
Yeah, I don't know where this is going to lead, but so far it's been, I don't know. There seems to be something that's going to change the way I create art, but also hopefully this dialogue can also inspire other artists to be more present with the spiritual dimensions in their work.
It seems to be a bit of an interesting time. I've been noticing in the time that I've been in and around Montreal, for there to be more art that touches on spirituality lately. It seems to be becoming more open about it, where people often, after the Quiet Revolution, because of the impact of Catholicism on the province, people were kind of rejecting a lot of spirituality and religion both, kind of putting it in the same bucket. And there seems to be, people are kind of forgetting. With the new generations, I think people are more curious about spirituality with less of these negative connotations.
Yeah, I think from my observations, like a big breakthrough in that realm was the show in New York of Hilma af Klint, because it was such a big venue and a big show that is still rippling out in the world, right? Like,
I think it affected people.
It affected the contemporary art community, where like, okay, it's now accepted again to talk about spirituality.
Now we can talk about what we might have even held in our side.
Well, yeah, like for me before that show, I was feeling like outsider. I don't know how am I going to get into the institution.
I felt the same. It's almost like, especially in Quebec, it's almost viewed like you're naive or stupid if you believe in spirituality.
It's not
like
the intellectual, like high art. But
it's kind of funny.
If you are like in the spiritual realms, like spirituality, like the intellect is refined because thoughts have to go through something that it's intangible, right? So it is very spiritual, but like spirituality is the exploration of all of how this works and understanding how how thoughts are connected to atoms and vibration. And so like this awareness just has not reached the public yet, because they were not ready. We were so like confined to our boxes for so long.
Yeah.
And now, like, as the world is getting destroyed, unfortunately, that's kind of like what we're experiencing now, but it will create the empty space necessary to like reevaluate those
destroying
things.
The old systems.
Yeah.
To touch on astrology again, Pluto just went direct. It's in Capricorn now in Western astrology. So it's sort of like an end of an era. In Aquarius, it's going to still be ruled by Saturn like it was in Capricorn, but it's more angled towards the new, transformative. But it's going to, unfortunately, probably take violence, uprising, authoritative regimes being turned over. But we have to hold the hope and the vision that something more positive could come. I don't know if we're at the critical mass with humanity yet that is necessary for us to, to collectively rise up into more compassion being the more and balance of feminine and masculine energies in the world. I think we're kind of edging there, but it's sort of like two steps forward, one step back, or one step forward, two steps back.
Definitely. Yeah, but that's why, like, I think my calling to make this podcast was so strong, and now I'm realizing that there are a lot of artists that are these antennas that are receiving the same codes as I am to open these dialogues and actively share them. And I think it's a beautiful time, also scary for some to be living. How are you experiencing those times?
I think it's exciting, but also it's kind of a scary time. The energy is really intense. There's a lot of uncertainties in the world, and we have to just kind of surrender and realize that, like, we don't know what's going to happen next exactly, but we have to follow our path, follow our heart, lean into spiritual practice, or, to get us through the things that can be challenging in life, which can be many.
Yeah.
Realize we're spiritual beings, not just the scared animal self, work with that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think as, if we are aware of that, I think it's important to be also present for others, like during those times.
Yeah.
Because, I mean,
it's important.
If you have a bigger perspective of it, whether it's accurate or not, at least it gives hope. It gives a certain, direction in a way.
Yeah, we're all in this together. I spend a lot of time talking about healing and psychology and trauma with my friends, and providing support for each other and sharing experiences. And it can be valuable just touching base with your community, whether it's your local community or your people you know, and just kind of sharing the journey. Like, oh yeah, I was thinking about that too.
The guest I'm showcasing, Sophie Grégoire, next week in the podcast, she has she like channels these messages, and she has like 10,000 something followers, and every time she posts every few days, it's very specific, but I'm always like, whoa, that's exactly what I'm going through. And then there's like hundreds of comments of people that are just like, wow, how is this possible that we're all like experiencing the same thing? And it's always like on point. So
I've noticed that a few people that you might discuss things with. Synchronicity really interests me for a long time now, and it's just like there are different kind of waves of energy which could relate to astrology, like the cosmic rays from the universe, and different planetary bodies that we don't fully understand yet how it works. But quantum physics is now becoming almost spiritual, so you might discover that things that we didn't think could affect us, like the planets do more than we realize.
Yeah, the science of the planets is old science, and it is the science of the future, even though it's like 2000 or more. Like,
speaking of people in astrology, I do a lot of relationship astrology too, as a Libra maybe. So it's like you and I, we each contain our birth chart, the energy of our birth chart. It's like you are an election, if you know what an election is in astrology. You are that moment, part of you, of course you're your soul, but you're also the energy of that moment you were born. So it's like those, either when souls interact, you're almost like a transit to that other person. While you're orbiting them, you are influencing with that energy. So
yeah, interesting.
Who we choose to be around with, or who we're more drawn into at certain times of life. I've noticed that certain teachers come you know, it's almost like someone can be a teacher or a messenger for that moment in time, whether it's a short or a few years or a short time.
And you can see that in astrology.
You can see it in astrology. You can see karmic indications in astrology. So you can see soulmates. And soulmates are not just romantic. They can be lovers. They can be people you work with. They're basically lesson bearers.
Yeah. Okay.
People who help you.
Karmic links.
Yeah.
Karmic people that are programmed to come at specific times and be a mirror for various things.
Yeah, it's quite magical. I mean, that's partly why I paint people, because I think it's pretty magical how we're incarnated in these bodies and interacting in ways that can cause each other to wake up or have a whole nother experience or a different way of thinking or help each other heal or wake each other up. I often paint some people where there's one person that's sleeping. This is an unconscious pattern that I've noticed over time, like analyzing my own paintings. Yeah. There's so many paintings where there's one person is sleeping and the other one is awake, you know? So it's like, all right, I see this.
Are you sometimes depicted in your paintings?
Yeah, often.
Oh, yeah.
And it's kind of funny the reaction people might get. They might think that I'm egotistical or self-absorbed if I often paint myself, but you know, that's fine. Sometimes I just find people's reactions to be kind of funny. But yeah, it's partly just because the model, I mean, the easiest model, and also I think we're all absorbed in our own journey, whether or not we admit it, you know?
Yeah.
As a Leo rising, I can admit that I'm absorbed in my own journey. I'm the main character of my own story, you know? Like we all are. That's our ego. That's our vantage point, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
We are our own sun, you know?
Yeah. Okay. And then to go on that, I had a question I wrote down about that. Like your work frequently explores the sacred feminine, eroticism, and the union of opposites. And with ongoing conversations around the empowerment of women's sexuality and the rise of feminine consciousness, how do you think eroticism in art can challenge or contribute to those movements?
That's a good question. It definitely does both. It can be provoking to people. I think I do like provoking people, but sometimes you just provoke people by being yourself. You know, I've had an interest in sexuality since I was young and just exploring things. And I studied Tantra for a long time, and that's basically sacred sexuality in terms of not the Western idea of Tantra where it's all like you go to a retreat and stare in your eyes of your lover. Like that's nice and everything, but Indian Tantra, you know, which is based on God realization and Kundalini using the power of Kundalini rising, which is to attain enlightenment. So using the masculine and feminine energies, whether with a partner or within yourself. You don't necessarily need a partner to do Tantra. Most Tantra was done in a ritualistic or worship setting. Most people don't realize that Indian Tantra originated creative visualization, devotional worship. A lot of the common practices today of Hinduism come from Tantra. But it's been kind of maligned and sensationalized by like British colonialism, judging and seeing a few of the more shocking rituals and provocative rituals where they ate meat, or there's agoris who, you know, consumed a corpse, or ashes, they smear ashes on themselves as a way of an ascetic process, or dealing with death or what's disgusting. And that's an interesting thing too for art, because we're in a society in North America that can be very prudish or puritanical. We still have a lot of those roots. So in Europe, they're a little bit more, just sexuality and nudity is more accepted. At the beach, people will be nude, and the nude in art, you will see a museum, there's so many nudes, it's not shocking. But in North America, there's a totally different response. So I started painting the nude in college. I had a professor, Mark Greenwald, who just encouraged us to go into like the psychological depths and, you know, paint ourselves nude, or we painted the nude model all the time in my school. So I became comfortable with it. And then when I started studying Tantra with my spiritual teacher, I started to have deep spiritual experiences. It's very, very powerful stuff, considered to be even a very dangerous practice, because it works very powerfully with Kundalini in an almost forceful way. So it can actually, if you're not doing proper clearings of your nadis, your, Ida Pingala, you can actually have brain damage or go insane or, even crack your skull in some yogic mythologies.
Wow.
Yogic mythologies can be a bit dramatic.
A bit extreme, yeah.
But I experienced some things that were really extreme, but I also had experiences that would be even considered rare among yogis for going through this, at a very young age. And it definitely formed my relationship to my work, where sexuality became a metaphor for the divine masculine, divine feminine, Shiva Shakti in Tantra. Kundalini is associated with Shakti, the feminine energy, which is coiled in the base of the spine, which through working with various yogic techniques and visualizations, energy work, you can guide it up the middle channel of Sushumna, where Shakti becomes in union with Shiva, her lover, and you experience enlightenment. So to me, sexuality is partly just an exploration of the body, matter, joy, relationship, and also the fire of the self, the energy of the life force, the creative life force.
And is this like a big part of the dialogue within your art? Like, do you express this very directly?
Yeah. Sometimes it becomes just more personal, and sometimes it's more spiritual too.
Oh, interesting.
So.
Yeah, that's interesting. And there is a big shift that has to happen, understanding sexuality from a more lustful and kind of these, what they call the vices, into a more, especially for women, have been repressed and also abused by men. Like, it feels like this, for a lot of women, like, I don't want to talk for women, but from my experience with different, talking with different women, there's a lot of this sexual energy that is either like has to be tamed because it's or repressed because it got abused,
or suppressed. What's suppressed can become explosive, or people can react in an extreme way. Like we live in a world of duality, right? So if something is suppressed, maybe that is partly what happened to me. I was raised Christian. I was raised basically given this subconscious information that sexuality and the body are bad, and things like masturbation are bad and wrong, and you'll be punished by God. Like this sort of brainwashing was part of my upbringing. I went to church every Sunday. I had to go to Sunday school. My dad was in a cult. He had a lot of he's still an extreme Christian evangelical. So I have a lot of this like energy of the patriarchal Christian repression in my DNA. Yeah. So my overexpression possibly of sexuality in my work at times might be a bit of rebellion. We all have an inner teenager too, right? I do like to provoke people, but I'm also just expressing, to me the nude is also truth. It's a symbol of truth. Authenticity. We're not like wearing clothes that put us in a painting in a certain time, like, this is 2024, based on what he's wearing. Or
do you have advice for any women that are going through this right now, like that are having this repression and are trying to reconnect with that sacred energy within themselves?
For me, becoming more in my body was very helpful. Doing breath work, pranayama, dancing, whether you're belly dancing or putting on music at home. For women, I think, and men too, but being in your body, moving your hips, doing yoga, stretching, those are ways that we can heal, like the collective sexual trauma and also the personal trauma in our bodies, and that fears, anxieties, the things that can lead to feelings of repression, self-judgment. I mean, honestly, I think the ideal relationship to have with sexuality is that you are not pulled in any one direction. You don't have to be celibate, but you don't have to be promiscuous. You could do what you feel is your truth in that moment, for whatever is good for you, which might vary person to person.
Because also the sexual fire is connected to your truth, right? The Kundalini is your purest form of you. It's the pure will, the pure...
There's a lot of power in that. There's a lot of energy in that, and you can use it Kundalini yoga teaches a lot about using the energy of, the lower chakras and raising it up through different techniques to actually utilize that energy. At times I used my own sexual energy instead of expressing it with another person in the paintings, like through like channeling it upwards and into like in Kundalini yoga, from the other kinds of yoga, the arms are connected to the heart meridian. And so what you are expressing through your heart, you can express through your hands with art too. So if you bring it up to the heart center, or maybe the Ajna chakra too, you can have visions. And
it is directly connected with art in like creation also. Yeah, that's very good advice. I want to ask you another question that I had prepared, and about the doppelganger. I know you talked a lot about that in different texts. Yeah, what does this
symbols?
Yeah, what does that represent for you, and how have you explored this?
It ties into Jung. I know you've talked with your guests before about Jung. I got into Jung. It traces back to college after I had my first spiritual awakening from doing psychedelics when I was still in high school. I had no idea about spirituality or anything. I was just rejected Christianity, and then I just didn't really have an opinion. But I started to question things after I did my first tab of acid. I had a spiritual awakening that made me question, like, what's going on? There's more to this. It's not just drugs. There's something else there. That the drugs were just a messenger, a way to trigger an awakening. So I realized that I was having a lot of dreams about certain things. Sometimes they were quite dark. And I would often view I had this murderer chasing me, and I was always being chased. And maybe there's some trauma there, but I wasn't aware of it at the time. There was always some man chasing me, or I was captured or trying to escape. And I started to read about dream symbolism because I was like, these are annoying. I'm having these dreams like twice a week. So I wanted to understand, and I picked up, my mom had a book on her shelf, like just kind of waiting for me, the Jung's book on dreams. Memories, Dreams, Reflections, I think.
Autobiography.
Yeah, and I was just like blown away by how you can divide a dream into all the different parts of yourself as a way of interpreting, your anima, your animus, your shadow. And for me, I started to think about, the murder in my dream, is that my animus, that's been pursuing me, or that I was running away from, or was feeling, at odds with. So I started the more I paid attention to my dreams, the more they spoke to me, and the more intense and layered and complex the dreams got. So I started to feel like life is a dream that you can interpret too. And I see a lot of things as symbolic in life, like it's not in art too. At the same time I was in art school, so I was looking at a lot of art history and looking at a lot of Renaissance paintings, and a lot of them are heavily symbolic. So from all sides I was just facing, like symbolism and archetypes. So for me, I had a trip on shrooms or acid where I was looking in the mirror and seeing all the faces changing. I don't think I was sober at the time, but maybe it was a couple of days after I had tripped, and it was low light, sort of like blue hour-ish, and I could see my face. It would like grow a beard and like become like a man, and I could see it just change. And I think I started to think about the nature of everything as a mirror. So to me, the doppelganger is sort of like it's sort of like a mirror, it's your other self. And in a way, in mysticism, everyone is your other self, So it's a way of relating that you can treat everything and everyone, the plants, the dog, or each other, with that compassion and love that you would wish to treat yourself with, because we are all one. So
it feels like it's perspective that actually changes a life, because then you start paying attention to everything, right? It's like it opens a big
too
portal.
Much, and you have to like tone it down, like be more.
Can be overwhelming, when you realize that, like, especially when it's like felt. It's not just you reading in a book, but like
you have an insight. It hits you in a certain way.
Yeah, I thought maybe to conclude, you have your tarot.
Yes, I have it.
It could be cool, like, because you read tarot and you do astrology, but perhaps we could,
Pull a
if you
card.
want to pick like a card or 2 cards and have just kind of this intuitive message.
It's not it's interesting because I usually work with the Rider-Waite deck because I've been using it since I was 18. So this is the Major Arcana of Leonora Carrington, which only recently was published.
Okay.
And she's one of my favorite artists. She paints a lot about spirituality, alchemy. She was one of the female surrealists that is lesser known, but becoming more known. As we were saying, the feminine, a lot of female artists were not recognized in their time and are becoming more known now. So,
yeah, a lot of feminine. Also, I'm realizing that the feminine are the mediums of the world. Like they're the receiver of. Like we all have this feminine counterpart, even men, but women
the anima
are these channels that were repressed.
Yeah.
So we were basically stuck in the 3D and the rational, with no disconnection to like other realms for so long.
And it's wonderful that it's becoming more accepted, like women's voices, women's experiences, but also there's the duality. It pushes back. There's a pushback from the patriarchal systems that don't really wish this.
They don't want to
like
lose
women's
control.
rights in America being up, for women's rights becoming under question and things like that, in places around the world. Let's see.
Oh, we got the geese. That's so cool here. There's so many animals. There's some...
You want to shuffle?
Sure. There's like some wild turkey.
Yeah.
So this is just 22 cards. The
It's
Major
just
Arcana.
the Major Arcana, yeah.
Okay. You want me to pull or you want to do it?
You can shuffle. You can pull. Go ahead. Someone fly! Hurry!
Oh my god.
What the fuck?
That's the...
Mars and Cancer is really...
That's the Mars and Cancer?
Well, it's like you're kind of like...
Oh my god, I'm like sad for the...
I know. Nobody's gonna eat them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Jeez. So aggressive. I saw them fall.
Me too.
Oh.
What the fuck?
Poor babies.
Okay, well, yeah. Hopefully it's for, not just for...
I said a little prayer.
Okay.
I mean, I know I still eat animals and stuff, but it's hard to see.
Yeah, I'm wondering what's the reflection in that moment right now.
Yeah.
That's so like...
It's pretty intense. Death,
so
right?
raw right behind us, and probably like the cameras will have...
Oh my god.
No, I'm wondering like...
It's tough to process that.
Yeah,
I don't know if I can interpret it right away.
There's a lot, because connection to nature is the feminine, but then nature also is the provider of... Well, that's not even... It is nature. Animals are part of nature.
Yeah.
But then our connection to death also, I guess, as part of nature, of destruction, of endings.
As long as they eat it, I don't have a problem with it. And since we're in farmland here, they probably are going to eat it.
I would hope so.
It's like, even if we know that death is not the end, like that's a Nick Cave song, even if we know that, there's still a grieving, like we felt sad, it's still a grieving, even if you know that there's a cycle of life and that it might sustain other life, there's still a sense, like to touch on, the painting of the people, there's a temporariness that's almost something that's sad and a grief, because a lot of people, like, they leave. I would say the universe yeets the people out of my life when the time is gone. When it's done, I might not want to let someone go, but like something will happen and it'll be like end. Sudden endings, that's...
It is our ego that doesn't want to die. Like, I think that's the fear.
So when we see death, or when we experience endings, it can be hard for the human self to accept.
So should we pick a card to see like what the archetype of what just happened?
Do
you want me to do it, or you want to do it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So this is the one.
Oh my god.
The devil.
Wow. The devil. And it's an interesting card here. It reflects the classic chained masculine and feminine. And there's the masculine and feminine have sort of horns and like little goat beards and tails, and the devil is feminine in this card, which is interesting. There's a Venus symbol in the sacral area.
Okay, so it's very
and almost like kind of bat-like wings. I see it sort of as a projection that the dark feminine is, you know, evil, seductress, also somehow judged as, you know, like the wild sexuality. It's judged as being temptation, you know, and somehow less than. It's sort of like a pagan card, you know.
But this painter is contemporary?
She's like surrealist, so the 1900 or the early 20th century.
Oh, okay. So it's not that recent.
They're very simplified cards for what she does. She actually does pretty complex figurative paintings, but this one is sort of like stripped down in a simple symbolism. How do you see the devil in the tarot?
The devil card, I see it as being enslaved by your desires, because Venus is also connected with the desires. But basically, like, desires are what often make you imagine there's actually entities going in your mind, and they're like giving you like things, objects, people that you desire and that you don't have. So instead of focusing on your heart, like what you really need to do, what your soul wants to accomplish, you're always chasing these desires that are not fulfilling anything except instant gratification, dopamine, and then nothing, emptiness, and then you need another one. And so for me, I see the devil as just all of the temptations. Like, I feel lonely, okay, I'm gonna go online and I'm gonna shop, and then you start scrolling and I need this, and then you're like
spending your energy and, you know,
yeah, exactly, time for stuff that doesn't benefit anyone, not even you.
And we have to fight against that impulse. As, you know, being in bodies, we will always have the urge to, you know, use coping mechanisms at times to deal with stress, or, you know, like you said, different distractions. And we have to think about the way we use our energy, because we're infinite energy. The universe is full of infinite energy, but we're in finite bodies that can only hold so much energy, and it's constantly leaking out in the ways. This world is so complicated, and there's so much going on right now, and we're constantly connected with the internet and social media to everything. We have to be very judicious about how we choose, you know, what we choose to do with our time.
Especially in this time, because health, I mean, the quality of ingredients is going lower, the pollution in the air, like everything is affecting our health right now.
It's very fraught time to be alive.
Yeah, so like our energy is more precious than ever to develop a connection with it and see where it's leaking, like you're saying.
And I find it very interesting because, you know, I've read a lot about different yogis, and, you know, the way that the things that have been practiced in the past, and often people would go to the ashram or go to a cave and meditate and escape from the world. But it's almost like today that's not the path for the spiritual person anymore. More like no one really goes, not very few people go to the monastery now, or even though sometimes I dream about like going to a cave or renouncing everything and going to the ashram and escaping life. I feel like life would just pursue me there. And there's no point. And I feel like the mission is to be in the world and to bring these, channel these energies in a way that is helpful to others. After I had my soul retrieval, which is around the same time as the spiritual awakening, I accidentally had a soul retrieval. I didn't seek it out. I didn't work with a shaman.
So what does that mean, soul retrieval?
I experienced a lot of trauma, mostly related to an abusive relationship with my spiritual teacher, who became my husband. And I think that as a way to deal with that, to deal with the stress and pain of that situation, which I couldn't get out of because I was also his caregiver. My soul sort of partly left my body. It's called soul loss. And in shamanism, they will help you retrieve those parts of your soul that are lost. I think Jung talks about this too when he talks about the aspects of the self. And yeah, it was a very interesting time, and I called it back. I guess it was needed for what I would have to do. And
is that recent that you called it back?
2016. Okay. So it's been around for a while, but everything changed. Spirituality became much more important in my life, you know. I suddenly had more qualities that were able to deal with the situations the extreme situations I had to deal with. My focus changed, you know.
In a way, would you say that it made you come back to the heart? Like,
yeah, and to my own truth and my own vision, instead of becoming, you know, when you have a teacher, a spiritual teacher or a guru, you're just, in Indian tradition, you're supposed to just give your whole trust to them and accept that they are right about everything. And this can lead to vulnerability, to abuses, you know. And I feel like I was playing out these archetypes with my relationship with my spiritual teacher. Like, it's like the patriarch. He was much older than me too. And it was like very much like Pluto, like Hades and Persephone going into the underworld and coming back with wisdom, you know. So I relate to that myth a lot. But it's like, for me, it was seeing for myself that you don't necessarily need a teacher or a guru, but like everything and everyone can be your teacher, but that you need to first be your own guide.
Yeah.
And for me, when I did the soul retrieval, it was like bringing back that part of myself that might not have ever incarnated before.
Wow.
So when I did that, I was just starting to breathe and feel all the tightness in my body and all the ways I was holding, and almost like, you know, when you're stressed or you might clench yourself, and how in yoga you're supposed to breathe and release your muscles, and especially breathe, because that's prana. Suddenly I started to feel strange, like something odd was happening, like almost like a psychedelic trip was starting, but I was sober, very sober. And I started to feel something literally descending into my body. So I felt, how I described it later, I felt like my soul was putting on my body like a coat. Like it was literally spreading inside my body and adjusting. It was a fascinating experience because I was just starting to get into spirituality and into my own spirituality that was unrelated to my teacher's beliefs and wishes. Like, he threw out my tarot cards. He didn't believe in astrology. You know, so it was kind of a rebellion, like a feminine rebellion against the patriarchal teacher, you know, to have my own thoughts and my own
And
way
this
of doing
has been,
things.
I guess, 8 years. Would you say, like, what would you say is your, have you found your purpose? Like, do you think you're closer to, like, knowing the reason why you're here on Earth?
I get closer all the time. I'm getting insights or messages, or it's unfolding. It's a process of unfolding that I wouldn't say is ever a conclusive finish to that realization. It's a constant, like a layer of unveiling, and maybe it might change from day to day. But definitely, ever since the soul retrieval, it was a very intense realignment with who I am and what I'm here to do. Because with my spiritual teacher, we had a certain vision in Tantra that of what our mission was, you know, that it was for enlightenment, but it was through enlightenment through tantric means, you know, the union of Shiva Shakti for mutual enlightenment was the goal. So losing that teacher was sort of like losing a dream. And I sort of realized that I can have that tantric experience on my own with with my own energy, that I don't need a man or a guide, a guru, a teacher to bring me that, you know. Okay. Since he brought me to
Is that something that you help people with? Like, if the people want to reach out, and do you do counseling and like different?
I do some astrology readings, not so much lately. I've been focusing on art and everything, but I still am open to that. I tend to have people come into my life who maybe need to hear what I have to say, or need to hear about my experiences, or, you know, maybe people come to my studio and I'll share about a painting and I'll describe it and I'll explain the backstory, and maybe I've not formally been doing that work, but I notice that people just come into my life who kind of need to hear what I have to say.
Okay, it's more organic.
Yeah. Yeah,
and maybe to close, where can people find your work? Do you have Instagram?
I have Instagram. It's Kara Eckler on Instagram, and also that's my website. I also have an astrology Instagram and website, YouTube, that they're not used so much right now, but I probably will be adding to them later.